Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're practicing sequence that's around the topic of yoga and aging. However, the sequence is really about promoting stability, being mindful of the stability that we have while practicing various poses. So we are going to practice some pretty foundational poses in yoga that I hope you can bring into your everyday life. And one thing that I do like to do before we get started is to talk about something with anatomy or the muscle system, just because I think it helps us get on the same page of terms so that we both know what we're talking about or referencing through the class. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So you should see a skeleton on your screen at this point. And this is a really cool 3D model that you can actually move around and look at. So as soon as we're done with this class and I get the video uploaded for you to watch, I'll also send a link to this 3D model. Now, what I think is really helpful about taking a look at these 3D models is that we can reference different bones or systems and put a name to it so that when we're talking about it in class, we can stay on the same page and you kind of have an idea of what I'm referencing or where that bone or joint system might be that we start talking about. So I'm going to start by looking at the back of the skeleton. So you can see the spine here and shift it down. So from the skull down, we have our neck or the cervical spine, and there's a place where the neck and the head connect, or the skull connect, called the occiput. You can even feel that at the base of your skull, top of the neck. There's a little indentation there. Going down from there, we have the tops of the shoulders, which move into the rib cage or the thoracic spine. Below that, we have our lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is essentially right behind our abdomen or our belly. And this is one of the more flexible places of the spine. And this part of the spine tends to take a lot of the motion or movement as we run through life. Then coming down into the pelvis, we have this kind of elongated triangular shaped bone down here, which is called the sacrum. And at the very tip of it is our tailbone. And so you could even, feel that. You won't feel it while you're sitting. You will be able to feel it with your actual hand though. Then we have our iliac crests, which are our hip bones. Again, those are things that you can kind of feel with your hands. It might feel a little dull in your mind, so bringing your hands to your actual skin and really trying to feel where these things are can be helpful in creating some sensation around them. Now, at the base of our pelvis, we have these two kind of circular bones that are protruding out. These are our sit bones. So when you sit, that's usually where our weight is resting, unless we're severely slouching. Then you might feel your weight more on the back of those sit bones. But if you've ever had a small kid sit on your lap or sit on your thigh, and you've felt their piercing sit bones into your thigh, that's usually what you're feeling is the base of their pelvis. So that's just looking from the back of the body. That's really where joints are connecting to, and that's really our, core or center as we move through various yoga poses. This is really what we want to be pretty mindful of. Now, there are also some things around that spine that contribute to mobility and movement, and specifically joints. And the main joints that we're going to be working with today are our hip joint and our shoulder joints. So we have one on each side, plural, joints. And down here, we'll start with the hips. We have an insertion of the femur bone, or that large thigh bone that you have in the upper thigh. That bone is called the femur bone, and that attaches into the pelvis. And then with our shoulder, you have a humerus bone, which is that long upper arm shoulder. This one is a little bit more complicated in the sense that you have a couple of different bones all coming together, in one place. And so here you can see that humerus bone connecting in with that scapula or shoulder blade. And then you even have the collarbone that's intersecting into this point. So again, using your hands, see if you can find your collarbones. Usually you can feel some protruding bones here at the base of the neck. And then as you start to roll your hands out or smooth your hands out, you might feel it come to the top of the shoulder here. And then in the back side of the body, we have our shoulder blade. And that's really what gives us the ability to move our shoulders forward and back, forward and back. The cool part about our shoulder blades is they actually are gliding on top of our rib cage. So they're not hard fastened into the rib cage. Instead, they have that movement ability. So all because of the muscles holding them together and holding them in place, the shoulder joint has some incredible range of motion. Here at the front of the rib cage, where that collarbone connects, is our sternum, or some people might call this the sternum plate. These are all things that we're going to be referencing through the class, and I'll make sure to remind you where these things are, and I definitely won't just expect you to remember all of these things that I'm talking about, but I hope that looking at this and kind of going through the terms will help you at least have some mental reference, since we got a chance to actually look at it and see it in front of us. So now we're going to go ahead and just get started with class. When you registered, you probably saw some notes that we're going to really be using just a chair and some space at the wall. A mat is nice to have some stability so that you don't have to worry about your feet sliding. Specifically, if you're wearing socks or if you're practicing on carpet, the mat's going to be pretty beneficial for you. So we're actually going to start by sitting today. As you come to a comfortable seated posture in your chair, try to sit up straight. So rather than just kind of slouching back and leaning back behind you, actually lift your rib cage off the back of the chair, sit up nice and tall. Now, as you look down at your feet, just observe their natural position. Sometimes the feet like to turn out. Maybe the feet like to do different things from one another. But today we're looking for some pretty specific foundational alignment. Let's start by bringing the heels directly underneath the knees. The knees should come out from the hip socket itself. So you should see, if you could see a bone, or if you could envision that femur bone right down the center of your thigh, imagine those bones being parallel to one another. So knees are straight from the hips, ankles are directly underneath the knees. Now look down at your feet. Turn the feet so that the middle toe could draw a straight line back to the very center of your heel. And if you do have hardwood floors or lines or tiled floors, you can even use those lines on the floor to help you line these areas up. So heels are even in relation to one another. Middle toe comes in line with the middle of the heel. Just resting with your hands on your thighs, take a nice deep inhale, nice deep exhale, and sit up nice and tall. Let the eyes and the face soft. Just notice at this point what it feels like to sit in this position. We call this seated Tadasana. Tadasana means mountain pose and is normally practiced while standing. But here, while sitting in this mindful way, with a very similar structure to the standing mountain pose, it's really just a sitting form of that exact same pose. Taking a nice deep inhale, nice deep exhale. Now to get started, we're going to warm our shoulders up. To do this, I'll demonstrate and then we'll do together so that you have an idea of what we're about to get into. So we're going to start with our hands on the tops of our shoulders. And if your arms don't bend that deep, that's fine. You can even bring them to hovering over the shoulders. But the idea is that we're connecting some awareness of the shoulders while we're moving our arms. So we're going to start just by creating some circles with our arms. We'll begin doing both in the same direction, and then we'll switch that rotation in that direction. And then last but not least, we're going to try and switch it up, and the arms are going to do opposite rotations. And so sometimes this can be a little bit of a brain challenge. So if it feels too overwhelming for you, you can go back to what we were practicing in the beginning, which is that same rotation on both sides. And then we'll just bring our hands down and move on from there. So let's go ahead and do this together. We'll start by bringing the hands to the shoulders. And you can bring your elbows together. And we're going to take the elbows down, out, and around, coming in from the top and back to center. We'll do that 2 more times. Down, out, around, bringing the elbows up and back to center. Last time. Nice big circles. Now, once you're back to center, we're going to do the opposite direction. So elbows move up, out, down, and back in. 2 more. Up, out, down, and back in. 1 more. Now we're going to do opposite rotation on one side from the other. So again, if this gets confusing, just come back to doing the same rotation. So we're going to lift one elbow up, opposite elbow down, and we're just creating those circles just in a different direction on each side. We're doing 3 of these. I just did 2, now I'm on the 3rd one. Back to center. And now we want to do the opposite direction for each elbow. So whatever elbow went up last is going to go down this time. Do it 3 times. 1, 2, and take your time. 3. Once you're back to center, and bring your hands down to rest. Really let the elbows hang. Sometimes if we're not moving the shoulders a lot or there's some stiffness there, that can be quite a workout in itself. So as you rest with the hands on the thighs, just take a moment to notice what happened to your seated Tadasana. Did you start to slouch? Did the shoulders tense? Are your legs not helping in the process? As you gently press your feet down and lift your chest up, taking a nice deep inhale and exhale. Soften any tension in the face or the eyes. Now, while we're sitting here, you might have noticed that sensation at the base of the pelvis or the sit bones are moving into the chair. If you have a softer chair with a cushion that you're sitting on, this sensation might not be as bold or as noticeable. So see if you can use your mind's eye to really tune into this area of the body. Now we're going to just do a little bit of an experiment here. And we're going to start by just leaning forward slightly, still lifting the chest up. And what you're going to feel is that now more of our weight is on the front of the sit bones as you lean forward. And slowly start to lean back. And you can even lean back against your chair, but still lifting the chest up. Now notice how your weight of the sit bones is on the back of the sit bones. And we'll do each side 1 more time. So coming forward, feeling that pressure and that weight, moving the front of the sit bones down into the chair. And then as you come back, leaning back, noticing how your weight is now on the back of the sit bones. Then as we come back to center, see if you can mentally identify the center of the sit bones. Sitting up nice and tall, taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. Now we're going to practice a pose called upward hands or Urdhva Hastasana. Let's start by taking the hands straight out from the shoulders. The palms are facing each other. Now, as you do this, notice if your shoulders are already trying to lift up towards the ears. Instead, see if you can roll your shoulders back. So we're squeezing the shoulders back to the wall behind us. And then pull your shoulders down away from the ears. Now we want to keep that structure in our shoulders as we slowly take the arms up and overhead. Now, in order to keep that structure, your hands might not go all the way up and overhead. And notice as you take the hands up, just observe if those shoulders start to lift back into the ears. If they do, can bring your hands down slightly, reestablish that form in the shoulders, and then go to your maximum. Whatever your maximum lift is, where you can maintain that structure. Urdhva Hastasana. That was a little demonstration. Let's go ahead and practice together. So starting with the hands forward from the shoulders, palms facing one another, squeeze the shoulders back to the wall behind you, and then try to pull your shoulders away from the ears. Now try to maintain that structure, that support in your upper back and in your shoulders as you slowly take the arms up and overhead. It's okay if your arms don't go up all the way. What's important here is that we're maintaining that strength in the shoulders the entire time. As you take a nice deep inhale, lift the very center of your chest up towards the ceiling. Try to lift your entire spine to the very top of your head. You should feel that the chin is floating parallel to the floor. So notice if your chin is lifting up, or even if you're squeezing your chin in towards your neck. And instead, see if you can just allow the head to float. And then bringing the hands back down, resting the hands on the thighs, and letting the elbows hang. The next pose we're going to practice is called Upward Bound Finger Pose. Urdhva Badanguliasana, bound finger pose. So I'll demonstrate and then we'll practice this together. We're going to start by lacing the fingers together. And then as you turn the palms out and away from you, we'll straighten the arms. Very similar position and structure is needed in the shoulders here. Rather than lifting the shoulders up towards the ears or tensing the head and the back of the neck, see if you can squeeze the shoulders back and pull them very actively away from the ears. And then we'll reach our arms up and overhead. Once again, the point is not to get the arms all the way up, but instead to keep this structure in your shoulders so that the neck is soft, throat is soft, but shoulders do feel quite strong here. Once we come back out, we're actually going to switch which pinky is on the loose end and relace the fingers, and then we'll do the other lacing. So let's go ahead and get started together. You're going to bring your hands together, lace the fingers, turn the palms out and away from you, and with the arms straight, squeeze the shoulders back as well as pulling them down away from your ears. As you gently press into your feet, lift the very center of your chest up towards the ceiling. And we'll slowly take the arms up and overhead, opening the palms up towards the ceiling. Notice if you're pressing into the finger or knuckle joints, and instead try to extend through the wrists, making your palms completely flat to the ceiling. Notice if those shoulders are lifting up towards the ears. And on your next exhale, soften the eyes and the face, and draw the shoulders down the back. Bringing in the whole body to this pose. As you press your feet down, sit bones down, lift the center of your chest up. And we'll bring our hands down. Notice which pinky is on the loose end, and we'll switch the lacing of the fingers. This should feel a little awkward. Usually we all have one lacing that's not as comfortable or familiar, and so that's where we're at now. And you'll press the palms away from you. So as you pull the shoulders away from the ears, extend the arms up and overhead. As you take a nice deep inhale and exhale, fill the rib cage. You can even feel the sides of the rib cage starting to expand and open. And then we'll slowly bring our hands back down and rest the hands on the thighs. Now for our next practice, we're really going to bring our hands to the hips Or if you're comfortable doing so, you can even hold one of your wrists behind your back. The main thing we want to keep in mind here is if we do bring our hands to our back, is that the shoulders aren't rolling forward. Sometimes when the shoulders are quite stiff or tense, this might feel like a pretty dramatic action. If you feel any tingling or numbing come up, then you're going to want to bring your hands back to your hips. So it's your choice, whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'm going to turn to the sides just so you can see the position of my hands right now. Just holding one wrist against my low back here. Elbows are lifting back behind me so that the shoulders start to move back behind me. If you have your hands on your hips, there's a very similar action happening here. Elbows are lifting back, shoulders are lifting back to the wall behind you. Keep in mind, even if the shoulders lift back, we don't want them lifting up. So always keep the shoulders pulling down. You can almost stretch the elbows back and down to help encourage that position of the shoulders. So just double checking our foundation here, that the knees are straight out from the hips, heels are under the knees, and that the middle toe draws a line straight back to the very center of the heel. Now, whichever hand position you have, it's really important here to just keep some nice spreading in the collarbones. Sometimes it even feels like there's such a stretch that you might need some lotion here on the skin in the front of the chest or the collarbones. Now I'm going to demonstrate what we're up to, and then we'll practice together. We're just going to do some very simple and safe neck rolls here. So we'll start by taking the chin forward down to the chest, and then we're going to roll our head over to one of our shoulders. So ear is hovering over the shoulder, and then back to center, and then we move to the other side. We're not going to take our head back because that can be a little bit unstable and uncomfortable. It takes a lot of strength in our neck muscles to actually hold our head up. And so as soon as we drop our head back, it can usually cause some compression, and it can honestly feel a little bit more difficult to lift the head up, which can cause some strain in the neck just by doing that. So we're not taking the head back behind us. Once again, chin comes forward, head rolls off to the side. We'll come back through center, do the other side. We'll do this a couple of times. And then to come out, we're bringing the chin back to the center and then slowly lifting the head up. The entire time, we want to be mindful and intentional with what our shoulders are doing. So let's go ahead and get started. With your elbows lifting back and pulling down, slowly bring your chin down to your chest. Taking a smooth, steady inhale and exhale here. Soften any tension in the sides of the neck or the tops of the shoulders. You can move at your own pace, so you can decide which direction you shift your head towards. But as you roll your head off to the side, you'll feel your ear hovering over your shoulder, and you're welcome to stay as short or as long as you prefer. Coming back through center to shift to the other side. Taking a few breaths here. Sometimes this can be quite sensational. So notice what the rest of your body is doing. Essentially, it's just our head, just our neck that's moving. The rest of the body should feel quite stable. So as you press into your feet, feeling your sit bones way into the chair, the chest is still lifting up from that point. We're still trying to grow the spine upward from the weight of our sit bones and where we are sitting. The last few neck rolls here for today. Whenever you're done, you can bring your chin back to center, slowly lift your head, and then bring your hands forward, just allowing the elbows to hang. You don't have to worry too much about what the shoulders are doing once we come back to this rest position. It can be nice to just let the arms hang and not put in that muscular effort. Well, now we're going to move to standing. So you can shift your chair off to the side, We'll come back to that towards the end of class. Now, what we're going to be practicing next, I like to place my mat up against the wall just because it helps me feel a little bit more stable and keeps me in alignment, but I'm also just standing on the mat the whole time. So I'm going to demonstrate what we're going to practice, and then we'll do this together. So we're going to do a little bit more work in the shoulders before we start moving into working with the hips today. We're going to start by placing or standing next to the wall. And I'm going to turn my back towards you since I'm actually going to move my hand behind me. So I'm going to actually shift walls just so you can see a little bit better. So I have one of my shoulders near the wall. I'm going to take that same hand back behind me. The thumb is pointing up towards the ceiling here. My hand is about hip height and maybe a foot away from my hip. So there's a little bit of space between the hand and the hip joint. So I take a few breaths here. I'm trying to stand in a pretty mindful way. So now we're in Tadasana, or mountain pose, which is traditionally practiced while standing. I still want my knees in line with my hips, heels in line with my hips, and then turning the toes so that the middle toe comes in line with the very center of your heel, and standing nice and tall. So you take a few breaths here. Whichever hand is not against the wall is actively reaching down. And then we'll bring our hand back to our side and we'll switch which side of our body is facing the wall and do the other side here. So I like to call this microsurgery for the shoulder because it really starts to open up this whole shoulder joint, bring some activity to the upper back and thoracic spine, which is absolutely wonderful to take any pressure off the lower spine or that lumbar spine we had talked about before. So I'm going to start with the left side of my body against the wall, and I'll give you instruction based on that. So let's go ahead and start by standing with the feet hip width apart. And if you feel unstable in these positions, you can always lean against the wall slightly or create some level of support around you. If you're in a kitchen or in a bedroom, having some sort of ledge to hold on to can be helpful as well. With the left side of the body towards the wall, just notice your standing posture here. Turn the toes slightly so that the middle toe draws a line straight back to the center of the heel, and your feet will be about hip width apart. So you should feel that you have a stable base. If your feet are quite close together, you might feel a little bit more unbalanced. If you still feel unstable with the feet hip width apart, you can even take them just a little bit wider for comfort. So we'll start by taking the left hand back behind us. Palm comes to the wall, and our thumb is pointing up towards the ceiling. Spread the fingers nice and wide. Remember, we want our hand to be about a foot away from our hip, but the hand, it still stays about hip height. As you take a nice deep inhale and exhale, soften any tension in the eyes or the face. Notice if you're shifting your weight on one foot more than the other. See if you can even out that pressure of the feet. As you bring your weight heavy into your heels, lift the very center of your sternum up towards the ceiling. Now at this point, your right hand is just reaching along the side of the body, the right side of the body. Fingertips reaching towards the floor. As you squeeze your shoulder blades together, try to stretch through both fingertips in order to take the shoulders away from the ears. Eyes and the face soft. And you can bring your hand back down to your side, just in a simple standing pose, Tadasana, letting go of any tension in the arm or the shoulder. Again, if you're feeling any tingling or numbness popping up in that arm or that shoulder, then you can go ahead and come out sooner than I might instruct you to. Now we're going to switch sides. So now that right side of the body is facing the wall. Feet are still in Tadasana here. So the heels are under the hips. The feet are at least hip width apart. As you turn your toes in just slightly, you'll see that the middle toe draws a nice line to the very center of your heel. Then we're gonna take our right hand back behind us. So palm is nice and open, thumb is pointing towards the ceiling. We want some space between the hip and the hand that's against the wall. However, that hand is still about hip height. And you can reach your left fingertips down along the side of the body, standing up nice and tall. Take a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale, the eyes and the face soft. As you press into your heels, notice how your weight is distributed from left to right. As you bring your weight into your heels, lift the very center of your sternum, the very center of your chest up towards the ceiling. As you press your right hand into the wall, squeeze the shoulders together. You're almost trying to roll your right shoulder back to the wall behind you. So there's an external rotation, meaning that the inner right arm is trying to turn and open towards the wall and really the wall behind us. So it's turning outward. And then if you haven't come out already, you can bring your hand back down. So you're in that standing position, Tadasana, standing nice and tall. So now we're going to shift our position. I'm going to shift my position, at least in relation to you, so that you can see what we're up to next. We're going to actually come into a pose called Slanted Uttanasana. So for this one, I'm actually leaning against the wall. I'm resting most of my weight against the wall here. And then I'm going to step my feet forward just about a foot, maybe not even a foot, maybe 10 inches or so. And I'm going to take my feet as wide as the mat or a little bit wider than hip width apart. So this is often a position that it's helpful to take your socks off, or make sure that you have sticky mat, or make sure that you have some nice traction so that your feet aren't sliding. The reason is because as we move in this pose, our center of weight starts to shift. So right now, most of my center of gravity is actually back here, which does not put enough pressure on my feet to press them deeply into the floor, which is when we can most likely slip or the feet come out from under us. It really comes down to our center of gravity and where our feet are. So just be safe here. You don't have to step your feet out as wide. But we do want the toes to turn in slightly. We still want that middle toe to come in line with the very center of the heel here. And then we're going to place our hands on our hips, and we're just doing a baby lean forward to start. Taking a nice, smooth, deep, steady inhale and exhale. We're still squeezing the elbows up, shoulders back. And now as I press into my heels, I'm actually using that to drive my hips into the wall. And then I'm using that pressure of my hips in the wall to charge my chest and lift my spine away from it. Now for right now, you can just look down at your mat, maybe looking at the end of your mat. But notice the difference between lifting your head and looking forward at the wall. Notice what happens in the neck. And then bring your gaze down slightly. And now notice how the back of the neck specifically is just a little bit longer. Now you can decide how far forward you bend or lean, but the main thing is that we're not bending here in the belly, right? So notice if your back is rounding, if your belly is contracting, and instead lift the chest up and really try and sharpen your sit bones into the wall. So you can even bend your knees slightly as you start to come forward, really just to keep that sharpness in the sit bones as they press into the wall here. And then we'll come back up to stand. Now to come out, you can heel toe step your feet together. So if you were to pivot on your toes, you can bring your heels together and slowly, we'll take little baby steps to bring the feet back underneath you. And then you'll come back up to stand. Now we're going to turn and we're actually going to face the wall. And we're going to practice a very similar pose with a different relationship to the wall. So you can watch for a moment and I'll demonstrate here. So we're going to start by bringing our fingertips to the wall. I have them about chest height. And we're gonna step our feet back. And notice how I'm straightening my arms as I do this. You can bring your hands flat to the wall. Straightening my hands as I do this. And then I'm gonna take my feet a little bit wider than the hips. And now there's two positions to be mindful of, right? One is kind of like a push-up position. Notice how my body is straight like a plank here. But ultimately, I really want to bend at my hips. And so I'm going to start to bend my hips, take my sit bones back and up to the wall behind me. And we're going to take a few breaths here. If you feel like your neck or your shoulders are bothering you in this position, you can always bring your forearms to the wall instead of your hands. We also don't have to bring our hands and our arms very low. We can keep them a little bit higher so that our chest and our spine is slanting forward. However, we really want most of that bend happening in the hips here as we practice this pose. As you take a few breaths, soften any tension in the face or the eyes, pressing the heels down. You'll definitely feel the calves, the backs of the thighs or the hamstrings starting to open. Now, if you feel stable doing so, go ahead and take your feet a little bit wider. So now this is a pretty wide standing pose here. My feet are definitely wider than the mat, absolutely wider than the hips are. It's probably about 3 feet of space potentially between my feet here. And we're really just focusing on lifting the hips up and back to the wall behind us. You can decide how deep into this pose that you go. It's not required for you to move very deep. And then to come out, you're gonna heel toe step your feet together. So what I mean by that is that we actually have to pivot on our heels, lift the toes up and in, and then you have to lift your heel and turn on your toe ball mounts to bring the heels in. Once you've heel-toed stepped the feet together, then you can slowly walk towards the wall and come up to stand. You'll do this slowly if you feel any dizziness or lightheadedness. You can always lean against the wall for support if you feel unstable. And then we'll come standing in Tadasana, or mountain pose. Taking a nice deep inhale and exhale. Now with your hands on the wall, we're going to move into another pose called Parsvottanasana. I'm going to demonstrate and then we'll practice together. So for Parsvottanasana, I'm actually standing quite close to the wall. I'm going to bend my knees slightly and step one of my feet back. In this case, I've stepped my right foot back first. Traditionally, there's about 3 to 3.5 feet of space between the feet. You don't have to step that wide if it feels unstable or uncomfortable in any way. We'll be here for a few breaths. Some of you might even feel comfortable leaning forward onto the forearms. And then to come out, a baby bend to the knees, and you can bring that back foot in, and we'll do the other side. So let's go ahead and practice this together. We'll start standing quite close to the wall. We'll bend the knees, and we'll take our left foot back. So as you bend the knees and you lean forward against the wall, try and stretch your left foot back. Toes come down first, and then you'll bring your foot down to the floor. The whole time we're leaning forward, putting most of our weight on the wall here. As you look down at your feet, you'll notice that those back toes are turned out slightly. They're turning essentially towards the upper outer corner of your mat. So there's really about a 45-degree external turn from the center line. However, your front foot is going to draw a straight line back to the heel on the back foot. Sometimes, or more traditionally, that inner edge of the front foot lines up with the very arch of the back foot. But if that feels unstable, you can always walk your front foot out a little bit more. So there has to be a sense of customizing what you need for stability, right? The closer and more in line your feet come to one another, the more stability and balance that's required. But as you widen out that standing base and have a little bit more space between the feet, that's when it can feel a little bit more stable. So you can decide what works best for you today. So you take a few breaths here, try to straighten the legs completely. Some of you might be ready to lean forward and place the forearms on the wall. Some of you might not feel comfortable doing that, and that's absolutely okay. As you take a nice deep inhale and exhale here, see if you can try and turn the inner thigh on your back leg to the wall behind you. It's almost like you're trying to turn your inner heel back to the wall behind you, inner knee back to the wall behind you. And as you take a few breaths here, soften the face and eyes. Now, this is something that I didn't demonstrate, but we're going to move into a little bit of a twist. And so if you have your right foot forward, you're going to take your right hand to your hip, and we're turning towards that straight leg. Remember, we have the wall here to help us, and you don't have to twist very deep, but essentially we're trying to twist our rib cage towards that straight leg or off in that direction. So it's almost like a standing twist. Remember to keep that back leg completely straight, driving that back heel into the wall, pressing that back thigh away from you as you do this. And then coming back to center, leaning forward slightly. To come up to stand, you can shift your front foot back foot forward, and then they'll eventually meet in the middle. Now we got to do the other side. So coming back to standing close to the wall. Now we're going to keep our left foot forward and right foot back. So bending the knees, and you're leaning forward against the wall as you stretch that right foot back. And then as you shift your weight, you can just observe the space between the feet. Traditionally, there's about 3 to 3.5 feet, but we do want it to feel slightly wide. So even if it's not 3 to 3.5 feet, just reflect and see if you can go a little bit wider, right? It might not feel super comfortable, but remember, we have the wall to help support us, and we can always turn the feet off to the side and come out that way. So Parsvottanasana, intense stretch of the side. Back toes are pointing off about 45 degrees to the side. The inner edge of your front foot or your left foot draws a line straight to the back heel, or a little bit wider if that's what you need today. We're really focusing on straightening that back leg completely. And if you feel comfortable doing so, you can even bring your forearms to the wall here. There is quite a significant stretch in the calf of that back leg. Take a nice deep inhale and exhale. Almost think about turning that inner right heel back to the wall behind you. Inner right thigh, inner right knee turns back to the wall behind you. Now we're going to practice a little twist here. So left foot forward, left hand comes to the hip. You can keep your forearm or your palm on the wall here. We're just turning the rib cage towards that straight leg. So it's a little bit of a twist here. Really focus on keeping that back leg straight, pressing the back thigh away from you with the eyes and the face soft. And then coming back to center. You can bring your hands to the wall and to come out, stepping that front foot back foot forward, and coming up to stand. Standing nice and tall. Now we're gonna start to wrap up our class today. We're gonna end class with a nice seated twist. So I like to turn my chair sideways so that I can actually use this back rail of the chair. Now that's not necessary for you to do as well, but it can help get some leverage and kind of hold you in place as you twist. So I'm sitting on the edge of the chair here. I still want to have that form of sitting mountain pose or sitting Tadasana. Knees are coming out from the hips, heels are directly underneath the knees. And then I'm turning my toes in slightly so that the middle toe draws a straight line back to the very center of the heel. As your sit bones move heavy into the seat, lift the center of your sternum up. So there's this constant rising and extending sensation happening here. And as you take a nice deep exhale, we're going to twist towards that back of the chair. Then you can use the wall, you can use all kinds of things, ledges in your house, even a couch arm to help give you some stability as you turn. With every inhale and every exhale, notice if your knees or your hips are trying to shift with your twist. Instead, press firmly into your feet. Try to sink your sit bones down into the chair. And we're really trying to twist here in the abdomen. So as you take a nice deep exhale, soften the belly and see if you can twist a little bit deeper. Then we'll come back to center and we're gonna do the other side. So I'm gonna shift around. Now I have the opposite side of my body facing the chair, making sure that my knees, hips, and feet are all in line with one another, and that the middle toe draws a straight line back to the center of the heel. Here, the hips are in a neutral position. So see if you can keep that placement as you take an exhale and twist towards the back of the chair or towards whatever ledge you're using to twist. With a nice deep inhale and exhale, soften the belly. Notice as you soften the belly, how that outer hip, or really in this case, the hip you're turning away from, notice how that hip kind of sinks down as you soften the belly and focus on twisting in the abdomen. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. And then coming back to center, sitting nice and tall. Let's do each side just one more time here. As you come back to that first side that you're twisting, make sure that the feet are in line with the hips. Middle toe draws a line straight back to the center of your heel. And then this time, notice what's happening in the shoulders. As you squeeze the shoulder blades together, try to pull your shoulders away from the ears. Now the intention is not to do as deep of a twist as possible, but this time, see if you can maintain that structure in your shoulders and that openness in your chest as you twist. As you take an exhale, softening the belly and the abdomen. Now this time, if it feels comfortable for you, go ahead and lift your chin and look over your left shoulder. So you're turning to look back behind you, essentially. Try to keep the center of your forehead, the nose, and the chin all in line with one another. Now, as you keep this twist of your chest, we're just going to turn our head to look over the opposite shoulder. So we're still in the twist. Now we've just turned our chin over the opposite shoulder. Now the gaze is in the same direction as the legs. And then come back to center, unraveling from the twist. And we'll practice our last side last time. Placing the heels in line with the hips. Middle toe draws a line straight back to the very center of the heel. Starting with that foundation in the shoulders. So squeezing the shoulders together and pulling them away from the ears. You should feel that the whole front of the chest the whole front of the shoulder is starting to stretch and open. As you take an exhale, you can start to twist. Really focus on keeping those shoulders rolling back, keeping that chest nice and broad. Now, if you feel comfortable doing so, you can lift your chin, look over your right shoulder, so you're turning to look back behind you, keeping the center of your forehead, the nose, and the chin all in line with one another. We'll try to maintain this twist, and we're just going to turn our head to look over the opposite shoulder. And now our gaze is looking in the same direction as our legs are pointed. And then coming back to center. Taking a nice deep inhale and exhale. Soften any tension in the face or the eyes. Now, normally we would practice something like Shavasana or corpse pose. And that's where we really just lay down and let go of everything everywhere. I understand it can be a challenge to maybe get off the floor or get up and down from those types of positions. So it's something that we can even practice while sitting. So it's up to you. If you'd like to lay down on the floor and that's accessible to you, then you can go ahead and do that. If you'd like to lay with your legs up the wall, that's also a wonderful option to end class. However, if those aren't options for you, we can even just practice this while sitting. As you soften the eyes in your face, take a nice deep inhale and exhale, letting your elbows hang towards the floor. We're just going to take a few moments, tuning our ears to the sound of our breath. The mind will most likely wander, thinking about other things. And as soon as you notice that the mind has wandered away from focusing on the breath, gently bring your attention back to the body, bringing your attention back to your inhale and exhale. As you breathe, notice how your rib cage expands and contracts, feeling the sides of the ribs opening. And you can bring your hands together in Namaskar. They call this prayer pose. I'll bow my head to you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to practice and join me today. Namaste. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to practice with me, and I hope that you walk away with something you might be able to integrate in your day-to-day life. If there's anything that felt a little bit more challenging, I'd almost dare to say that that's the pose you should be practicing more regularly. I know that it's easy to stick with things that we're most comfortable with or that seem easier, but it's usually those more difficult things that we actually need time with most. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to chat about it. But otherwise, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here, and I hope to see you in some of my other classes in the near future. I hope you have a great rest of your day.